All right, well, it's 10 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this informational webinar on the Ocean Protection Council OnceThrough Cooling Interim Mitigation Program. We're scheduled from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. today. My name is Melissa Kent, and I'm a project scientist at California Ocean Science Trust in Oakland, California. I'll be hosting this webinar on behalf of the Ocean Protection Council, and we will be joined by Tova Handelman, Marine Protected Areas Program Manager for the Ocean Protection Council, in just a moment. So about this webinar, the purpose of this webinar is to provide an overview of the competitive grant solicitation and to provide an opportunity for the prospective applicants to ask questions. This Zoom webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be archived at OPC's OnceThrough Cooling Interim Mitigation Program webpage in the next couple of days. And I'll go ahead and put that URL into the chat in just a moment. So a couple of housekeeping notes: that all of the public participants are logged in right now in a listen-only mode. We will be saving all of the questions until the end of Tova's presentation, and you can ask questions in two ways. You can either chat in the questions to us at any time during the webinar using the chat box on Zoom, and we can pose those to the group, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you to speak. We will be able to unmute you, and you may need to unmute the line on your end as well. For folks calling in on the phone, you should be able to press *6 to unmute yourself. So without further ado, I'll turn the webinar over to Tova. Tova, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for attending this webinar. As Melissa said, my name is Tova Handelman, and I am the Marine Protected Areas Program Manager at the Ocean Protection Council. I am very excited to speak with you all today about our OnceThrough Cooling Interim Mitigation Program and the competitive grant solicitation we just released on November 1st. So here's an outline of what we'll be discussing today. I'll start off with a quick overview of what the OnceThrough Cooling policy is, and then I'll get into more specifics about OPC's competitive award program. And then we'll wrap up with a summary of what you can find in the current solicitation. And then, of course, there will be time for questions and discussion at the end. So I will assume that you're all familiar with what OnceThrough Cooling is and its impacts, so I'm not going to go into that, but I do think it's worth reviewing how OPC has come to receive these funds to create this competitive award program. So just quickly, in 2010, the State Water Resources Control Board established a policy to address the damaging impacts of OnceThrough cooling, and that policy requires power plants to stop using OnceThrough cooling technology. Until they transition to less harmful cooling systems, they're required to make mitigation payments to the state of California. This payment amount is set by the State Water Board, and it's based on the power plant's annual intake volume of water until they come into compliance with the policy. So the policy directs that $5.4 million of those payments received will be allocated to the Ocean Protection Council annually to support projects that increase the marine life associated with the state's marine protected areas in the geographic region of the facility. So we'll get into what that means in a moment, but I just wanted to note that this amount was based on an interagency budget analysis, which was conducted by the MPA statewide leadership team, and it analyzed the costs associated with the MPA management program that have a direct nexus with OnceThrough cooling impacts. So as you'll see here on the chart on this slide, any remaining funds beyond $5.4 million allocated to OPC will go to the California Coastal Conservancy, and that will focus on wetland restoration. Plans come into compliance with the policy. So for the next 5 years or so, we anticipate that OPC will receive $5.4 million annually, but eventually we will receive less. So this competitive award program is expected to end in 2029 when all of the power plants are required to be in compliance. So there are 4 program priorities that guide how the $5.4 million should be spent annually to achieve the goals of the policy to increase marine life in California's MPA network. So in order for MPAs to accrue their maximum ecological benefit, including those that offset once-through cooling impacts, MPA regulations need to be enforced, and ocean users need to be educated about those regulations in order to improve compliance. Also, funding research and monitoring projects will help us understand the level to which our MPA network may be offsetting once-through cooling impacts. And finally, the funds will also be allocated to restoration projects that increase marine life in the geographic region of the facility. And this competitive solicitation is for restoration projects only. There will be solicitations for the other program priorities in the future, but now I will focus the rest of this webinar on the restoration solicitation that we have open right now. So let's get into what the geographic region of the facilities actually refers to. The OPC, partnered with Ocean Science Trust to convene a working group of the OPC Science Advisory Team. And the Science Advisory Team worked to scientifically define the spatial extent of once-through cooling impacts and to help us understand what the geographic region of the facility is. The working group determined that because oceanographic currents connect locations both inside and outside of MPAs, the harmful effects of once-through cooling extends 100 kilometers north and 100 kilometers south from a power plant's intake pipe. So you can see from this map, which was taken from the working group's report, that this means that the impacted area is the entirety of state waters, which is 3 nautical miles from the coastline, from San Diego to Big Sur, and it includes the waters around Channel Islands and also wetlands and estuaries within this region. So to be eligible to receive funding for this competitive restoration solicitation, the projects must be focused within this region. So projects that are outside of this region, meaning north of Big Sur, are ineligible at this time. I'd like to highlight the working group's report in particular because it is a key document that established the scientific foundation for the award guidelines and for this current solicitation. So the working group used the best available science to interpret the policy's key terms, such as increased marine life and geographic region of the facility. And the working group also identified an ecological framework to evaluate restoration projects that would have a high likelihood of increasing marine life. So if you would like to propose a restoration project, I strongly recommend that you review this report, as you will need to demonstrate in your application how your project addresses the report's recommendations. The working group's report can be found on the program's webpage, in the award guidelines, in the solicitation itself. You can't miss it. You'll definitely have enough opportunities to click on the links for that report. Okay, so what projects are eligible? I won't go into all the eligibility criteria right now. You can review them in section 2.6 in the award guidelines, but I do want to give a quick overview. All proposed projects must be consistent with the State Water Board's once-through cooling policy. The projects must clearly demonstrate how outcomes would increase marine life associated with MPAs in the geographic region of the facilities, as I mentioned, and it must be focused within that geographic region from San Diego to Big Sur. Projects must be ready to start work upon approval, and they should be completed within 1 to 5 years. Funds can be awarded to public agencies, including local, state, and federal agencies, public or private universities, nonprofit organizations, private entities, federally recognized Indian tribes, and state Indian tribes. And finally, you must have all of your environmental permits, such as CEQA and NEPA, completed before submitting the full proposal. So you can read more about what might make a project ineligible to receive funding in the solicitation, but I wanted to highlight 2 main reasons here. The first, as I mentioned before, is that the project takes place outside of the geographic region, which means north of Big Sur. And the second is that the project creates manipulations inside an MPA or otherwise would cause take of any kind as defined by the MLPA, the Marine Life Protection Act. If projects create manipulations or take, those projects will not be approved without the appropriate proof of permission by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and other agencies with jurisdiction. So the minimum award is $500,000. Subawards are allowed, so it's highly recommended that applicants with projects under $500,000 collaborate with others to create a larger proposal and apply as a coalition. And if you do that, then in your application, you would define who the administrative lead would be for that group. I strongly encourage applicants discuss their small projects with me in advance of submitting your proposal. I definitely want to hear what kind of projects are being proposed out there, and I don't want to cut anyone out just because they have a smaller project. So I can help you link up with people that might be doing something similar. The maximum award is $3,400,000, but that's the amount that we have available in this solicitation. So to encourage a selection of diverse projects that address the current needs, it's unlikely that we will award a single award for the entire amount, but it is possible. I'd also like to highlight that points will be given to projects that benefit disadvantaged communities. So if you or someone you know has a project that would fall in this category, but you don't have the capacity to apply for this grant, please get in touch with me. We have some resources available to help with this. So please see the solicitation for more information on how to determine if your project would benefit disadvantaged communities, and feel free to reach out to me as needed. Here's an overview of the upcoming timeline for the competitive grant program. So applicants are required to submit a pre-proposal by November 30th. All pre-proposals must be submitted online through our online portal, which is called SOAR, S-O-A-R. Detailed instructions on how to submit through SOAR are available in the solicitation, but please make sure that you read these instructions carefully because SOAR can be a little tricky to use. So definitely make sure to read those instructions to have the smoothest application submission as possible. The pre-proposal, it's intended to be more like an outline of the project. There are templates on the website for you to answer a few questions and submit a budget and timeline overview. The more specific you can be, the better, but the pre-proposal can remain high level and you can include estimates if you don't have those locked in just yet. The pre-proposals will not be scored. OPC will receive them to check that the proposed project meets the eligibility requirements, and then by December 28th, no later than December 28th, I will notify the applicants if they are invited to submit a full proposal or not. Only applicants that are invited to submit a full proposal will be eligible to continue. So definitely, if you're interested in this, you must submit your pre-proposal by November 30th. So the invited applicants must submit their full proposal online through SOAR by February 1st, 2019. And the full proposals will be reviewed by a selection committee, and then the recommended projects will be presented to the Ocean Protection Council for the council's approval at the May 2019 meeting. So once projects receive approval from the council and submit their final paperwork and all of that, gets finalized, then the work can begin. So I would estimate that projects could actually start work around early summer 2019. So as you are creating your draft timelines for the pre-proposal, you should have your work starting in early summer of 2019 or later if necessary. So I will keep a rolling FAQ section on the website, so be sure to check there regularly. The website is here on the screen now, and it's the same website where you can find the solicitation and the award guidelines, the working group report that I mentioned, and all of the other important documents needed to submit your application. Of course, you can always contact me directly if any questions come up after this webinar is over. And my email address is listed there on the screen as well. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Tova. That's a super informational webinar we've got going so far, and we have got a couple of questions already. Let's see. I have a chat question first from Amy Vieira, and then we've got a hand up from Jennifer Cassell. So we'll go to Amy's question first. Amy asks, are artificial reefs or restoration reefs eligible projects?
Yeah, hi Amy, thank you for your question. Yes, they are eligible. However, it is a difficult topic to do appropriately with the with the permitting, et cetera, that is required. But it is eligible, and for projects that are considering artificial reefs, I would really recommend that you put your efforts toward reefs that may be already existing, as opposed to creating a reef that didn't have a reef there prior, like for example in a sandy bottom area. You could still propose that. I just think that it would be more successful if you proposed an artificial reef project that was connected to a reef that is already existing as an artificial reef or exists as a natural reef. And of course, the permitting would need to be reviewed. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
All right.
Yeah.
So we'll go on to the next question. We've got Jennifer Cassell. Jennifer, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and go for it.
Okay, thanks you guys. Thanks, Tova. That was really helpful. I actually have 3 questions, but they're mostly just clarifications. So hopefully they're useful to other people. The first is the way the money was divided into the wetlands, the money that went to Coastal Commission versus the OPC money. Does that mean that the OPC focus for this call especially will not include wetland proposals?
No, we definitely will include wetland proposals, but the Coastal Conservancy also is doing additional wetland restoration projects that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with this solicitation. So,
okay.
Yeah, so we will be considering wetland and estuary restoration projects.
Okay, that's super helpful. And the second, again, was a clarification. You put up the list of the different priorities, such as enforcement and education. And then one of those priorities was research on, I'll just paraphrase, on how MPAs might offset impacts from OTC. And then the fourth was restoration. And then you said that this call was focusing on restoration. So does that mean it's that proposals about that third bullet, sort of maybe even basic research on how MPAs might offset the impacts, that's not so much in this call? Is that sort of what you meant? Those first 3 bullets are not so much in this call, it's just about restoration? Or did that third bullet of research, could that be included in this call?
So yeah, that's a great question. So this call is for restoration projects. If there are overlapping elements, then that's perfectly acceptable. If part of your restoration project includes a research component, then you can still apply. Or an outreach and education component, for example, like a sign that has an interpretive sign at the restoration site or something like that. That could still be included in it. But in terms of if it were just a straight research project or just for outreach and education, that is not what this call is for.
And do you anticipate calls in the future for those types of?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, if right now, we also have another solicitation open that does address the research component, and that is for long-term MPA monitoring.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Thanks. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm definitely aware of that one.
Yeah. So that one, that's being administered by Sea Grant for people who are not aware. Where was I going with that? Oh, it is open now. That's for long-term MPA monitoring, and some of that. So that solicitation is for $9.5 million, and about 4.5 of that was funded from OnceThrough cooling funds. So we right now have 2 solicitations open from OnceThrough cooling funds. One's for research, and the other is for restoration. So this webinar I was focusing on the restoration projects.
Okay, and finally,
but sorry, just really quickly, just to follow up on the end of your question, there will be future calls for proposals for all of the 4 priorities. So there, you can expect that there will be another call for restoration projects in the future as well. But we're taking it in phases so that we're not getting too many calls out.
Okay, and briefly, because I know there's probably other people, again, this is a clarification, so I hope it's useful for others. In terms of the pre-proposal, it said in the RFP, as well as you said it today, it's not going to be scored, but really only checked for eligibility requirements. But then proposals will be invited. So I don't quite understand. Does that mean that any pre-proposal that's checked off on, it fits all the buckets for eligibility will be invited? Or if that's not the case, on what criteria will some proposals be invited and others not? So
yeah,
could a proposal not be invited even though it's totally eligible? It ticks all the boxes.
Right. It's a good clarification. It's pretty much an eligibility check.
Okay.
So if it ticks all the boxes and it's eligible to receive the funding, then we will invite that applicant to submit a full proposal. And then, how it scores through the review selection will be determined later. But basically this pre-proposal, it's meant to be kind of an overview. And since this is the first time that we are having this competitive solicitation for the OnceThrough cooling funds, and it is a little bit tricky on what, where the geographic region of the facility lies, and also, how it can prove that it would, it could increase marine life, et cetera. So we wanted to make sure that we provided an opportunity for people to share their ideas, but not get too far ahead of themselves if they weren't even eligible to receive the funds in the first place.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tova. Those clarifications are super, super helpful. I'm going to mute myself.
Your questions. Absolutely.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jen, for that. We have next up, we have a question from Parker House. Parker asks, if permits are already in place, would kelp forest restoration in some key areas of the Northern Channel Islands be acceptable? And to clarify, kelp forest restoration of long-term urchin barrens on reefs nearby large abalone populations.
That sounds like a really interesting project. Thanks, Parker. Yes, if your permits are already in place, and if your project is not, causing any manipulations or take in the MPAs unless you already have permission to do so, then yes, that would be eligible. And as I mentioned before, the OPC Science Advisory Working Group report has examples of restoration projects, and your project would have to, or your proposal rather, would have to address how you would, be working with those recommendations that the report recommends.
Yeah, to plug that was a great report, and Jen was one of our working group members who worked on that, and it was a great report to work on. So hopefully folks find some really good information out of it to help them understand better how their projects can apply to this RFQ.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see, we don't have any other hands raised or chats just now. Might give folks another moment or two to get their last questions in. And I think something that we had talked about earlier, Tova, was this kind of the talk about the geographic region. And so maybe you could talk a little bit more about the geographic region and where the projects will be based.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So yeah, I guess to clarify that a little more, the policy states, I've been getting questions about, why Big Sur, why doesn't it go further? There has been, for example, OnceThrough cooling in Moss Landing, Elkhorn Slough area, and further north as well. But the policy states that the funds collected from these mitigation payments need to mitigate the impacts of OnceThrough cooling that is still occurring, that is not in compliance with the policy. So Moss Landing and other OnceThrough cooling facilities that were further north from Big Sur have either shut down or have come into compliance with the policy. So they are not making mitigation payments at this time. And also mitigation has occurred and, funds have been collected in the past for those locations. So the power plants that are still not compliant are mostly based in Southern California, and that's what determines that geographic region of the facilities there. So that's why there's a stop at Big Sur.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thanks for adding a little detail there. Well, we haven't gotten any other questions in so far, so perhaps we will go ahead and stop the webinar for now. Again, we'll have this webinar recording in the next couple of days up at the OPC's OnceThrough Cooling Mitigation Program webpage. So if you know some folks who weren't able to participate today, all that information will be available to them soon. Any last closing thoughts before we shut it down, Tova?
That's it from me. I really appreciate everybody taking time today to learn more about this, and I look forward to speaking with you all further and seeing your pre-proposals by November 30th.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.